All right, I think we're up. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Illusion Horror Con. This is the Slot 2.5 panel incorporating real-life legends and myths into
Recording in
TTRPGs.
progress.
My name is Alandra Hileman, aka Lady Bedivere, and I will be your moderator tonight. Let me make sure I have my lists on the correct screens. Wonderful. I will be your moderator tonight. But before we get into discussion, let's go around and introduce everybody who is going to be here. I'll start because I'm already talking. Um, as I said, my name is Alandra Heilman. You can find me over on Quests and Chaos, sometimes on the Miskatonic Playhouse, and on Vanna Loswin, running and playing a lot of horror TTRPGs. And in another part of my life, I'm a horror playwright. Um, let's kick it around and introduce everybody else who's going to be chatting with me. Let's go to JR.
Hello, I'm Jason Fryer, writer, game designer, and general curmudgeon. I've been working on Cult since second edition. Currently, just wrote Beyond Darkness and Madness for the GM's Guide, and at the moment, currently working on Hearts of Ravensdale for Legend in the Mist. Trying to throw a little more, Ghibli horror into that one. So.
Wonderful. Let's continue around the circle to Stephen.
Hi, folks. My name's Stephen Wall. My publishing imprint is Delapore Media. I am a participant in the most recent Cult Kickstarter. I wrote a scenario for Broken Reflections, which hopefully will be making its way out in due time. We're just starting to see betas from that, so I'm really looking forward to that. That's going to be kind of my first professional TTRPG credit. I've done some other stuff. I've written a piece called Somebody Think of the Children for Call of Cthulhu. That was through the Miskatonic Repository. And recently I started a podcast called the Delapore Media Podcast, where I talk about all sorts of horror TTRPG related nonsense.
Excellent. And Kim.
Hi, I'm Kim Godwin. I am a freelance TTRPG developer and writer for Onyx Path, Helmgeist, and Sons of the Singularity. I've worked on for Onyx Path Publishing. I have done a lot for the Earthbane cycle. I've been on all three of those core books. I've also written for Trinity Continuum. I've also written as a developer for Scion, for Mythic Shards, as well as a writer. And I'm also one of the writers on Curseborn. So currently I'm working on the City of Curses book. And for Sons of Singularity, I'm doing Heaven is Red, which is Eldritch horror in space, which will be fun. I'm really looking forward to that. But I'm also a professional horror writer, so I'm a member of the Horror Writers Association. I'm an active participant with the Bram Stoker Awards. I been doing the webcomic Touching the Abyss since 2004. So I'm about to finish that up, but I have that up on the web and for sale.
And for some reason, I'm here too. Thank you, everybody. Wonderful. Well, I always like to kick things off with a popcorn question or icebreaker because I'm obnoxious and I came up in theater like that. So the first thing I'm going to ask to just kind of set the tone here is, do you have in your writings or your gaming history a favorite legend that you have utilized as a writer, as a game master, or even one that you encountered as a player, a favorite, or maybe something that you return to over and over again because you find it really rich to mine?
Let somebody else go first.
Oh man, there's a lot. I know for Curseborn, I leaned on the Resurrection Mary story, as well as like a couple of other like urban legends I grew up reading about. Like the Red Room or some Japanese J horror stuff too. So there's lots of really cool like urban legends where you have the guy with the hook outside the door, the car door, or that sort of thing. So I really like leaning on those sorts of things. Um, and old stories are always fun. The old vampire myths are always fun to lean on. I don't do that much with vampires, unfortunately, these days, but I love writing about it.
Great.
I like
Anything
to
else?
a lot of my stuff. I play with the Nephilim, the
Mm.
the and Seraphim. I like flipping those quite a bit, and because nothing, as one of my favorite B movies said, there from Prophecy, there is nothing more scary than an angel. Because whenever God needed somebody killed, He sent an angel. So yeah, and I've incorporated a lot of those angel myths and across the spectrum, not just Catholicism, and try to weave those into cult in other games.
Cool.
I don't remember that from B movie, but Jerry Seinfeld's got range. That's cool.
Oh boy.
Sorry, it's very late where I am. Um, um, so I think I'm on the fence here. I could juggle a bunch of these because I mean I did my PhD in folklore, and so a lot of legends got passed around. I would say that recently, one thing that I was looking at for the first time in a while for my podcast was the book "Vampires, Burial, and Death" by Paul Barber,
Mm.
and he starts out with this great little story called the Vricolagus of Mykonos that kind of talks about how even though the vampire in question that was kind of observed by this late medieval medical student, it was classified as a loup garou. It still has a lot of vampire traits to it, and it's kind of when you go back and look at some of these kind of early depictions of what a vampire is, you see how different it is from what we ended up with on the screen by the time that Count Orlok and so on were doing their thing. You get a very different picture of what a vampire is versus those early days, those salad days of vampire lore.
Sure. I think that segues nicely into the what I felt like was the obvious place to start, which is that when we say real life legends and myths, what do we mean by that? And I feel that there is not one right answer here. This is something that, and Stephen can probably speak to this as well, maybe the rest of
Oh,
you too, about like there is a lot of disagreement about what makes something a myth versus a legend versus a folklore because so much of it is taxonomal and just there is no one way to define certain aspects of these things. Um, but uh, I would love to hear from all of you. How is it defined for you, whether it's that's in your personal canon or whether that's something you've encountered academically or just the guardrails that you put on yourself for how you establish something, religion versus folklore, myth versus legend. What is the difference between a legend and an urban legend? Any of those things. This is kind of
yeah. Yeah, I think with urban legends, because most of us are in the modern age, one way or another. It's really just how it propagates and how long it's been around. Because like the scissor mouth woman here in Japan, she's a fairly recent one. Same thing with like the red rooms or things like the back rooms where we have creepypastas that are kind of seeping into the collective conscious of the public. But those are all things that originated from online posting in the past 10, 20 years. Um, like I remember my son telling me at one point that Justin Bieber is so old now at 18. And it's just like, oh my God, it's or like seeing stuff from the 2000s is being labeled as vintage. And it's like, 2000, the year two Y2K was not that long ago, guys, but it's been 2 decades. So it's like, so I know there's a lot more specifically in the taxonomy and like what actually classifies it. And it's like if something is because most things are religiously based, when we start talking about folklore and stuff like that,
Hmm.
um, where it ends up in canon. So it's just how things propagate
Yeah.
differently. Maybe in the next 10 years, Slender Man is going to become a real legend or folklore, by definition. But
I read something interesting that said urban legend is explicitly sociological, and that was kind of what this thing said, which is that a legend is something with a natural or supernatural phenomenon, and an urban legend has to have a component of a friend once heard or once saw, in order to have that like urban component. I obviously latch onto the idea of it. If it's an urban legend, it's a legend from the urbane, from the city, from society itself, as opposed to, I think folklore often gets tagged into that place of the other, the forest, the ocean, the mountain, the
Mhm.
places that aren't as accessible
Right.
to society. So that's really interesting. Anybody else want to chime in on definitions or differences with all these fun terms?
Well, I could give you the definitions that I would give like a typical 101 class when I was teaching it.
That'd be great. I'd love to see if they
Okay.
match the ones that I got in mine.
Okay, no, right. Well, this is I shouldn't be giving this away. I should be charging tuition, but fuck the university system. I never liked them anyway. Um, so where I come from, what we're talking about ultimately is belief. And so I start with Linda Dagg's definition of belief, which is culture specific and or religion specific truth. So a legend is a debate about belief. So
Oh, I
this
like that.
is so anything that if it's it's a legend if there is contention about whether or not it is true.
Okay.
Hmm.
Contemporary legend, as far as I was made to understand, contemporary legend is the term that academics use for urban legend. Contemporary legend, it has some sort of contemporary quality to it. It couldn't exist in the past. The example that we often give is the vanishing hitchhiker. You can't really do the vanishing hitchhiker without a car. And for those that don't know the vanishing hitchhiker story, the person picks up a hitchhiker on the road. They start talking about, a horrible night that they had and how they potentially died. And then they get to a point in the road, they scream and they disappear. And so you can't really, I mean, you can do that with like a horse and carriage technically, but it just doesn't have the same impact as if you do it with a car. And then from there, I don't know, an interesting category, one that I do I like playing around with a little bit is what they call ostension, which is this is legends that you can actually participate in to determine or to take
Mm,
part in that debate about belief. You know, is there a goat man living under the bridge behind the old railroad trestle? Let's go find out. And on
sure.
top of that, let's go
Hmm.
drink and try and shove each other under the bridge to see if the goat man eats somebody. It's
I'm from
that
that
kind of
area.
thing. Another one everybody seems to know is Gravity Hill is another great one about that. You
Oh,
put
yeah.
baby powder on the back of your car, see if the little children push it.
Hmm.
Hmm.
It's that sort of thing. That's ostension. And then finally, the two things that I'll add just for kind of because they are part of this, but I mean, I don't know, I separate them for my own purposes. Mythology is religion that gets written down, whereas folklore is anything of or by human beings that doesn't come from an official source. So a myth would be like an official source. So that would be like your Greek myths, your Odyssey, your Iliad, and maybe like your Indian epics like the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, stuff like that. The Bible fits into
The
that category
Eddas,
very
yeah.
nicely. But then folklore would be things like things that you don't write down that don't come from an official source. So that's where kind of like, ghost stories and I don't know, I'm trying to think about like stories about people going down to hell to bop the devil on the nose, stuff like
Yeah.
that. That doesn't get into a book, so that's folklore. And I'll shut up now because I've taken up a lot of time. But there you go.
No, but that lines up too with some things that I've heard. I've heard myth defined as literary canon versus folklore
Hmm.
being oral tradition, and it's that same
Yeah.
differentiation of the thing that got written down versus the thing that you just know. We
Yeah.
wrote down about the flood, and we told you don't step into the ring because the fairies will get you, uh,
Yeah.
yeah, or what or
Hmm.
whatever. So
Yeah. The myths are written down and they're controlled by kind of an authority figure.
yeah,
There's the
Right.
priesthood, there's, the government, that sort of stuff. That's official kind of formal culture, whereas informal culture, that's folklore.
Hmm.
Anybody can contribute to folklore.
I think that has really fun and interesting implications when we start to talk about using it in TTRPGs
Hmm.
specifically because um, every like I've played many horror games, and even just to contrast two that descended from each other, Call of Cthulhu or Cthulhu Modern and Delta Green have a lot of overlap in
Hmm.
the eldritch mythos that is used canonically in the source books. But even you can take two of the same things in those two systems and they work a little bit differently,
Yeah.
even though they're kind of descended from the same space. And I think that that really speaks to the power of how legend can use and permutate in this format when you start to bring it into the collaborative storytelling aspect of gaming and how you use sources, but also how you tell the story together. Um, uh, that's a really heavy one. We'll save that for a second and see if we have anything where we want to explore here. It was an important one to me, and I'll bring it up in a minute. But yeah, this idea of myth and legend folklore. Go ahead. You want to jump in with something,
Oh,
Kim?
I
Or
was just with the Cthulhu mythos specifically because
yeah.
of H.P. Lovecraft being a social recluse, but a prolific letter writer and talking to everybody in the speculative fiction where he was like he was also mocking religion too.
Hmm.
Where he's like, "Hey guys, write this. I'm right. This is my idea. Go forth and go with it. It's okay if it's different from what I'm doing." So we have Cthulhu stuff in Conan and stuff like that. And because people saw these things reappearing and reoccurring, it's like, "Oh my God, this book's actually real." And now we have copies of the Necronomicon that Alhazarad and all this other stuff, and then weird manga spin-offs as well. So it's all over. Call of Cthulhu is actually the #1 game in Japan.
Hmm.
Uh,
Oh,
they
And
absolutely love it.
I think it's also the most popular amongst women in Japan.
Oh yeah.
The most popular. Yeah, for me, the whole myth and legend and all that, it just uh, I kind of just see everything blur. I picture it as more of the sinew of storytelling all the way back. It's just how humanity reacts to their environment. For urban legends, now we're in an urban environment. Now that's why our legends are urban. Whereas before, when we were hunter gatherers, we just gather around the fire and try to scare the living hell out of one another so we wouldn't wander beyond the fire. And it wasn't just to scare us, it was to explain what is out there. And that I think that narrative need to explain and quantify our world, both through myth, through religion, through just narrative, is the whole core of like folklore and such. Because there, if you look across of the world of folklore and legends and even religions, there's always those narrative threads that line up. They shouldn't,
right.
because these cultures never touch, but it's just like that human thread. That's how I'm reacting to my world and how I'm trying to define it through words and through the written language.
I instantly think of the commonalities. Like, pretty much every ancient culture has a trickster figure somewhere in their explanation of how the world works. And what that trickster does and whether they are considered good, bad, neutral, how they function varies from culture to culture, but there's always this element of like, this is how we explain chaos, right? This is how we
Mm.
explain entropy, is that there is something out there that just pokes the badger with the spoon to make things weird.
Hmm.
Um,
I've always loved the one explanation for with the Inuit. A gentleman was talking to them about their legends and their beliefs, and then the person basically said, "We don't believe, we fear,"
mm,
and that's always resonated with me. So,
Yeah, I do know that like with certain older folks, you don't really you start talking about the supernatural, especially out here, and they're just like, absolutely not. We're not talking about that. We're not inviting its attention. Uh, because it's li you know, th this is the supernatural world's alive out here, and people are like, yeah, these things exist. They walk amongst us, and we try not to attract its attention because if the supernatural touches you and it wants you, you are pretty much screwed. So you treat it with like reverence and fear. Like some people in Appalachia, it's like you hear noises in the middle of the night, you stay the fuck inside. You don't go investigate. You let
mhm.
that stay out there. If you
yeah.
interact with it, you pull it in. It's that you have that ancestral fear in you and you hear it and it's like, nope, not today. I'm just gonna stay inside. But that's also like that folklore versus you are in an area for a while and you see weird things and it's just like, yep, we're just gonna it, that's happening and we're not gonna pay attention to it because if we pay attention to it, it's gonna see us and we're not gonna like it. But that's also like eldritch horror in general is like you attract the unknown, the
Mhm.
attention of something unknown because you're giving it attention. And then, and same thing with like, we see that in cult too, where it's like if you look through the illusion and you pay attention to what's there, what's going to look back and what's going to try to reach out and touch you now that you've like, hello, I see you. I see you. And now we're going to have a conversation whether you like it or not.
And does this feel like I'm kind of answering my own question, but I'm going to phrase it as a question so we can build on it. Like, does that feel like why horror is so compelling in TTRPGs, and specifically why the intersection of horror and legend are um, so I don't want to say common, but fit so well together. I feel like every horror TTRPG that I've played or looked into has, if it's not inherently built off of some sort of like lore, whether that is eldritch lore from the Lovecraft speculative, whether that is like Vaesen with the like much more ancient supernatural that we don't talk about, or the other world, things like that. They seem to often be intertwined. And does it feel like that is because of that? The characters as reflections of ourselves as humans have that need to try to explain and explore the world around them.
I think I would grab that by a different angle, kind of. And what I would share is the idea that tradition in human cultures creates a sense of continuity,
Mm.
but that continuity is a lie. All we are doing is just rebuilding the same thing every generation. It feels like
Mm.
we are connected to the
Hmm.
past, but we actually aren't. And so what we are exploring through horror is our world that's immediately around us. I don't think it doesn't have to be. It could be. I can't answer that question because I'm not a biologist. The closest thing that I could get to something like that would be like David Hufford explored legends surrounding night terrors and what they
Mm.
call in Newfoundland, where I live, the old hag.
Sure.
And there you can find this idea cross culturally because the old hag is a symptom of a night terror, which is a biological function based in kind of our primate evolution. So all human beings have that capacity. They just view it through a different cultural lens. So you can kind of get a cross-cultural thing going there if you kind of look to the body as sort of something that we all share in common. But
Mhm.
beyond that, I think what we're doing when we look at horror and why we consistently want to talk horror and we want to see horror and we want to work with horror and why so many horror games feel comfortable for us is because, I mean, this is how we are dealing with our present day reality. This is us just kind of, it's the same sort of sense that it's the same idea that like a dream helps you process what happened to you during the day. So that's where I would grab it. I'm not saying that I mean, that's the answer that I give. I'm not saying that, if you believe that there's continuity, that that's a bad thing or anything like that. That's just where I'm coming from. I don't see I don't see continuity. I see tradition, and tradition fakes continuity in order to create stability because we really don't have any stability. And that's terrifying.
I mean, there is something I'm always very interested in the like hypertextual narrative and form following function following form again, and form and storytelling. So there is something really interesting in that to me. This idea of if there everything is more cyclical, it's not about continuity, it's about re-exploring and reliving whatever. There's also something interesting in that with having something as structured as like a tabletop game where uh I am famous for running one shots. That is a lot of what I have built my platform on, and I run the same story or the same, module over and over and over again, but it's different every time it happens
Mm-hmm.
because the choices are always affected differently. So there's something interesting in the way that this search for answers and using horror to try to latch on to stability or create a narrative that we can follow um plays into, I think, that sense of like the form and the function of a tabletop game as well.
I think with tabletop games and using like the myths and stuff, it's like, how would we react in this situation and how could we try to change the variables? And it's just trying to explore the world and, that sort of like, I could do better meta commentary, and then we go and make everything bad. But I do believe in the cycles thing. Um, you know, Everyone knows it's like, hey, there's a noise outside in the middle of the night and I'm alone in the house and there shouldn't be any noise, but I'm going to open the door anyway and look around because something set off my Ring camera and I can't quite explain it. I want to see what this thing is. Is this a malfunction? And with tech, especially with technology now, with like all these little blips that attract your attention. And I think with TTRPG things and then with modern lenses, it makes it, you take those old myths and you can add these different spins, and then it can be catharsis, or it could be like an exploration of an idea of how technology or the modern setting can affect these sorts of things. Like my camera has an auto track function on it right now, right? So if I move, if there's like a movement behind me towards the door, the camera is going to move that way and autofocus. And then we're just like, what the fuck just came in my room? There's a legend about that. We're just talking
Right.
about that. We're talking about inviting presence into your house by speaking about these things, or you start talking about, giving demons attention, these sorts of things. So it's like, and those are things that are really easy to pull into an RPG experience, where it's like, okay, now we've accumulated, your thing went too well, and now exceptional success, or it could be a botch where it's like, okay, now you've accidentally ripped a hole in reality, and this thing's coming out to see you. And it's like, and it fits this myth, like the Candyman myth, which is built off the Bloody Mary myth, where you're shattering in that mechanically you could do that,
Mhm.
where you're invoking the spirit to come see you, and now you're dealing with all the ramifications of what happens when you invite that sort of entity into your house, and its main function is to murder you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a fun TTRPG scenario where it's like, oh shit, I don't want to die. How do I not die? So you're just kind of running around trying to avoid the Candyman or Bloody Mary. So it's an interesting way of going about it.
And
And
I
you
That's
can
think,
play
actually a
with.
beautiful example of ostension. Sorry, I'll let you speak, Jason. I
yeah, yeah,
apologize.
Jason, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say that the Candyman, aka the Forbidden by Clive Barker. I mean,
Mm.
that's a wonderful you know play that beforehand, the Bloody Mary was more of a just basically to scare you, whereas in the Forbidden, it was a social commentary where myth lives in our walls, lives in our mirrors, that we're always interacting with myth, and that myth wants and thrives on us, basically, interacting with it. And I think what I, as Kim said previously, for example, with J horror and this new backrooms, it's there. I I was kind of amazed by seeing the backrooms because we were talking about that back in the 90s when we were
Mm.
initially designing Cult. Well, how there is something behind the walls, that reality that we're dealing with, and I think there's a very convulsive reaction to society and horror. For example, the splatterpunk uh,
Mm.
era was specifically in reaction uh, against the golden age of horror, with vampires and ghosts that just seemed so quaint
Mm.
for people that are going through the 70s and 80s. You can, so what if there's a vampire? No, that this is a very visceral, very dark, and almost nihilistic society now. Vampires and pretty vampires is just not going to cut it. So the splatterpunks, it was a transgressive attack against previous myths, and I think that evolution in horror and myth is just, I mean, it's wonderful.
It's the reactionary nature of horror is also something interesting. There have been studies on media that have proven that when we see an insurgence of vampire media, books, TV shows, whatever, it precedes a recession. It always comes in like within like 2 or so years in the Western world at least. That will immediately indicate an economic recession. And they've studied this media cycle over like years and years and saying like this is now something they haven't fully figured out why it's a predictor, but it does seem to be a consistent predictor. And so I think something like that is kind of fascinating. How horror is often reactionary to what's going on. All media is, but particularly horror, the monsters that hunt us are often in direct reaction to whatever's going on in the world. And there's something that too with like the quaintness of like ghosts and vampires that tend to be a little more elegant or a little more systemic. And then you have like I feel like there's an increase right now in the sort of the eldritch horror that is the unknown, the unexplainable, the unfathomable, that there's an argument could be in reaction to how fast technology is moving and how we don't know how to like we don't have a model for this anymore. We don't have a predictor. So there's something really interesting to all of that. I also am going to backtrack off of another. This is the way my ping pong brain works, because it came up talking about like trying to explain things, and we brought up Bloody Mary and the Candyman and that sort of descent, which is also an interesting one because Bloody Mary comes from an actual physiological reaction. When you stare at a reflective surface too long in the dark, your eyes are not getting, or in the very dim light, your eyes are trying to fill in, your eyes and your brain are trying to fill in the data that they can't see, and it will start to fill in humanoid shapes, which is why people think that they see things in a mirror. Um, and so to see the interesting evolution of this like bizarro evolutionary way that our brain tries to fill in the gaps to the thing on the other side, and then the evolution of the thing on the other side, the thing in the walls, the thing behind the veil that's trying to reach in, is such a fascinating arc of how like human understanding tries to explain the world around itself. Um, and so we're on this media track. I had written down monster as metaphor. Uh, in TTRPGs, I've seen in horror it's used both ways. Sometimes the monster, the creature, the horror is a metaphor, and sometimes there's literally a thing from the swamp that's chasing you. Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island style. This time the monsters are real. Um, do you what are your thoughts about how you see that used in TTRPGs, and what what that tells us about gaming, about horror.
Um, well, especially when it's a player option, for games like Curseborn or World of Darkness, y- where a lot of people identify with it because of its the othering, the experience. So it's allowing them to process that sort of getting that catharsis. Is like, maybe I'm not that bad. I feel like I'm a monster. Society is treating me in this way, but I can still thrive. I can still exist. And then like with more like cult, where it's like the metaphor is very real. The manifestation of the shadow and the darkness and everything bad, and then now it's Hellraiser with the Cenobites. Um, so it's different ways of approaching it, because it's like, if you're saying that, hey, these things are manifesting based off of your own traumas and psychosis, a la Silent Hill style, crazy like cult Borderlands sort of illusion stuff. Um, it's like, oh, so the horror is in me. This isn't like some otherworldly thing, but it's kind of both. Like, because like the things in the dark are real, but sometimes it's within us that's even more horrifying. And it's like, so it's kind of interesting to be kind of like in the TTRPG space, because it's literally both, and sometimes at the same time. So it's like, oh shit, my own bullshit's hurting me as well as the actual bullshit in this world. How do I deal with this? So and it's like, well, we can get you therapy for your own stuff, but for this monster, you're gonna have to shoot it or run from it. You just pick one. Pick a direction and go. We'll get you therapy if we survive. If your brain doesn't completely break and you die of terror. Or in my Call of Cthulhu games, we die of exposure or being eaten by a kraken. It just
Yeah.
because the we crash landed the Zeppelin in the ocean for the fifth time. So so yeah, it's interesting way of going about both of it, and depending on your group, sometimes you need the metaphor more than you might need the physical more than the metaphor, because like through games like Wraith, where you're only dealing with the trauma, the physical manifestations of actual trauma and that sort of thing, it can be quite cathartic, but it can be quite heavy, because now you're making your entire group suffer your trauma with you.
Hmm.
But those
Yeah.
sorts of games are very good and very personal for the TTRPG experience, but you just have to handle it very carefully.
I like what Kim's saying there, and I'm almost kind of seeing the circle sort of as kind of, I have bullshit in my life that I can't deal with. This is because of the world having bullshit. Therefore, I put monsters into the world in order to make the world's bullshit and my bullshit manageable. I think that's kind of how I see it. Whenever I use folklore or a legend in a TTRPG, typically what I'm doing, if it's like something for Call of Cthulhu or something for Cult, I'm kind of using it to paper over the actual lore of the game, because the at least the what we all agree to is that the players don't necessarily understand the lore behind, or the player characters don't understand the lore behind, like the monsters in the Cthulhu mythos, or the very kind of complex falling apart bureaucracy of cult. So when I have players encounter kind of a piece of folklore, typically what that is it's society trying to understand something that from that lore that it can't understand. So it sees a ghost, a vampire, something like that, when in fact we have these kind of other explanations that are based in game lore.
Mhm.
If that kind of makes sense. That's sort of, I think of it kind of like, it's a lovely it's an actual paranormal theory, but there was a lovely kind of British TV movie back from, I think, like the 70s or early 80s, called the stone tape theory,
Yeah.
that kind of discusses sort of how we see, or what is a ghost in reality. And that's kind of how I see the folklore being, that's how I see kind of folklore being used, papering over those ideas that our minds cannot fully understand. And it's when we have to break past the folklore and we do actually fully understand that, heaven is falling apart or there are deep ones under the sea. That's when we crack and break apart, when the folklore no longer works to explain the situation.
Mhm. I mean, I think there's like 5 archetypes of monsters, and mythology takes those and introduces their own perceptions into that archetype. For example, the Revenant is basically ghosts, the undead. That is our human response to death. Well, that is a highly complex reaction across different cultures. And for example, a good example is the movie The Eye, which was brought over here. It was originally a Chinese horror movie where a person has, corneal implants put in from a person and can now see ghosts.
Mm.
In America, it was just basically, ooh, I can see ghosts. There's dead people around me. Boo. So, but in the original, although the character could see ghosts, she could see how in that culture it wasn't that the person was dead, it was the regrets. How had they died and what was left unfulfilled. And basically that is the true horror, is that when we die, something is not complete. And if we die in a way that uh, something isn't complete, we linger, and we linger in that anguish. And I think that is an infinitely more interesting conversation than boo.
Well, I'll agree with you, Jason, but I'll up the ante here, and I would say that American society, the reason we have I mean, I live in Canada now, but I'm from the U.S. originally. The reason that we just have the boo at the end of something like The Eye is because we can't afford to linger on those issues. When it comes to death in America, it's our own. It represents kind of the fact that we took that a different way in American society says something about how American society handles death and how maybe some of those regrets and those ideas we put off because we can't afford to deal with them. Maybe because we can't afford, like Kim says, the therapy necessary to deal with them. Because, we don't get to have that kind of rich therapeutic process of years and years of coming to terms with ourselves. Our health plan, if we have one, gives us 10 sessions, bing, bang, boom, you got to get back out into the workforce.
Yeah.
It's a little like the old jokes about, how Americans respond to the concept of like haunted houses, or even like houses in a lot of states, maybe the entire country, you're required to disclose if someone died in the house. And there's an old joke where you send Americans over to like anywhere in Europe and they start seeing things and it's like, did somebody die in this house? And they're like, well, yes, it's been here for
Yeah.
500 years.
Yes.
Plenty of people have died in the house. It's not that big a deal,
No.
and so the cultural conversation about what the horror is and why the horror is happening is obviously extremely relevant. And I'm going to use this to bring up my sort of like heavy question that I wanted to talk about, because it's something that I think about a lot. um being from North America, being from the US, a lot of our legends and folklore that exist here come in the form of cryptids, and I have used many a cryptid in my games before, and some of those have easily traceable origins. We know where the jackalope came from. We still accept that maybe it's a real thing out there, like it's kind of a fun shared legend, but we all like there is a traceable beginning point of that story. Or the Jersey Devil, there is a traceable beginning point of the first time that story showed up and we have record of it. But there are also creatures and legends that come from indigenous cultures that are often treated, I think very specifically of the skinwalker adjacent creature that was used in True Detective, whose name you are not supposed to speak. um the way it was represented in that show, extremely different from the actual legends that the tribes who believe in that creature live with and still live with. And that idea, similar to what Kim said earlier about like we don't speak of the supernatural, or we don't look for the things because we don't want to invite them in. Um, as writers, as GMs, as players, what is the burden of care that we have to be aware of the cultural context when we are remixing these myths and these legends? I know, like my personal example, I do a lot of uh, Bible and Christian based horror because that is the punch up. You know, in the rules of comedy, you go for the global majority. They're not going to be hurt by me remixing their product. That is not going to have a massive impact on the existence of that religion versus I'm not going to touch something like voodoo. That is not my culture to play with. But what do other people have thoughts on that when it comes to the gaming space, a space where we are constantly, like I say, remixing or retuning these stories for the modern world and the modern game?
Yeah, as a writer for Scion and a developer for Scion, which is a game talking about dealing with living religions and being the children, the incarnate, some sort of adjacent thing to the gods, all of them, all the gods, all the true myths. It's something we deal with a lot. And it's being respectful to the cultures, doing a lot of research, but in the end, realizing that we are creating a game to allow people a chance to interact with and interface with these cultures that may never interact with it before, or give people a chance to have their voice or to be seen. Like me growing up as a Chinese American, there was no representation. Like I had ninjas and super spies, and that was super racist. Uh, uh, or beyond the supernatural, all those other things. And then like, it was what I had because there was very little Chinese media coming over that wasn't like a very badly dubbed kung fu movie. So like that was all I had. So being to work on something like Scion and knowing that there is a lot of living religions and a lot of real world stuff, and everyone's view is different. None of these things are monoliths. Everyone's interpretation of the myths and the legends and the gods is different. Like I try to go and talk to the communities that actually believe in those things. And say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. And then you'll see arguments among those people about like the interpretations of the different goddess. It's like, or god, goddess. And then like going even further back, you'll see with like Greek mythology, it was all very personal to the households, to the villages. So everyone's interpretation's different. And so now us as developers and writers going, how the f do I do this? And it's like, okay, I am doing my best, my due diligence to be sensitive, to not appropriate, but in the end, I'm creating something for people to interact with as a game. And having is like, this is not the textbook, even though we have people with PhDs working on these things. It's like, but ultimately, I'm trying to give you something that you're going to want to play with and interact with. And sometimes it's from the other side where you're playing a child of the bad guy. And it's like, well, how do I make this something that a player is going to want to interface with and not feel like shit about themselves for the next 5 sessions when everyone's pointing at you saying, you bad, you know? It's giving people a chance to play something that isn't necessarily like black and white, even if the religion itself is black and white. So it's like it's a weird balance it's like, is this going to be something that someone's going to want to play with that they can play with and actually enjoy? Otherwise, it's going to be like, well, why do I want to invest in that dude? That sounds like a really lame idea. But some people might be totally down for that sort of depressive gaming, which is probably why Wraith is so popular. But it's it's like I want to feel bad about myself for the next 6 hours of gameplay. So it's just making that, being respectful. And then like in the end, I'm trying to create something fun, a fun experience for my players.
I mean, that, yeah, I couldn't say it better. Basically, that is the core of it. Just treat everything with respect. Do your research, for God's sake. I mean, I used to work back in the 90s. We didn't have access to a lot of, research unless you went to the university, and it shows in quite a few, you know, of the products. And I mean, some of them, there were a lot of mistakes, and mistakes are still being made. But in the end, we are making games. As long as you do your due diligence, try to treat the subject matter with respect, and still put your own, flair into it, then maybe you'll get a pass. I mean, I find that I've seen several discussions that some designers basically say, "Oh, if you're this or if you're that, you can't write, you know,
Mm.
that subject." I'm like, at the core of us, we're all still human. We still have, you know, the same feelings, the same ideas. We just coming at it from a different perspective, and the more perspectives we add, the better. For when we're doing Hearts of Ravensdale, we're we're pulling from Scandinavian mythology, Japanese mythology, and weaving those two together.
Mhm.
And it there's a lot of common ground that you can actually weave together. And I like putting that narrative threads, those, that tissue together.
Well, and I think we said before about the parallels that you can see across cultures in those, like, trying to explain the world. You find those really interesting threads, and they're not always one to one, but when you find those commonalities, it makes for a really interesting merge.
My thought on this is that you can't avoid the hard conversations. You need to embrace that. You need to walk into that. To do otherwise is really to it's really to invoke a kind of privilege that not everybody has. You can't be there is no such thing as being apolitical. You're either political or you are political without thinking that you're political, which basically means you're being an asshole. So yeah, when it comes to this kind of stuff, I'm struggling with a lot of it right now. I'm working with a lot of it both in kind of personal gaming and also writing projects that I'm under contract to complete. So I mean, on the one hand, I need to be I need to be willing to fall on my face and be wrong, and I need to be able to deal with the fact that where I'm situated in the world, my privilege is going to do harm no matter what I do. I have to accept that, and that this is what I need to deal with. This is what I need to get through in order to write and produce. And so a part of it is kind of taking the time to sit down. Like I'm working right now. I have a playtester who is a member of an indigenous tribe that I'm utilizing his time and effort as kind of a cultural consultant to make sure that I'm not writing anything outright offensive. And I'm taking his criticisms to heart. And I'm asking him, first thing, okay, you pick up a book that's about this particular topic. What do you want to see in it? You need to foreground those ideas, even if I'll use a very brief example. In cult, oftentimes we want to write kind of no place. We want to write kind of that anywhere USA sort of vibe. You can't do that with indigenous tribes. You can't do that with indigenous people. They I mean, and these groups want to be represented as themselves, and they want to be represented in a specific way. They don't want to be papered over. And so that changes the way you write cult. It changes the way I have to write cult. And, I'm still adjusting to that. And I will continue to adjust to that as I turn in draft after draft until I get it right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think I think multiple people said, I think especially Kim said, like no culture is a monolith.
Mhm.
And that is something that I think incorporating legends, urban legends, mythology, folklore, all these things into our gaming also allows us to explore. A lot of my literary background is specifically in vampire folklore and literature and the evolution of that. And you see through all of that how it really drastically changes over and over and is constantly adjusting. And that happens both through time, but also through location. Um, and it's all kind of under that same archetypal the undead, if you will, the revenant figure, but it's adjusted to speak to what that part of the world, what that group, what that story needs it to represent. So it's important to have context. You can't really take things out of context in that way. um and that I think in the terms of like writing for games, kind of to what you were saying, Stephen, that also is really helpful in a way because it forces I know it forces me when I'm writing a module to be specific. Like the thing that gets to be vague and eerie is the horror that's creeping around the corner. But I can tell you the layout of the house. I can
Mhm.
tell you which part of the country you're in because that's going to change how you respond to the creepy thing that's knocking on the door. In some parts of the country, that door's locked and you're not worried about it. And in some parts of the country, you better hope you get to your firearm first because they're coming in. And that those nuances add a lot to what then becomes the mechanics of the game and the story that's being collectively explored at the table. Um, we have gone through all of my incredibly vague and casual bullet points at this point, so we still have a little bit of time. I don't know if any questions have come in, but if there's anything else that all of you want to bring up or address as far as how you incorporate legends and myths, or what's the goofiest thing you've ever done? On Monday I ran a game that was a mixture of an Icelandic Christmas myth and a Christmas carol in Delta Green.
Wow.
um yeah, that's my use of myth and folklore for the month. And it was interesting because I presented both as like parallel threads, and I waited to see which ones the players picked up on before I decided what direction the actual mystery was going. Um, and I think that's one of the fun things about folklore and using folklore as a guiding vein for your horror is you don't have to make all the decisions. It can evolve with the what the players do.
Oh man.
I can give you kind of an example. Actually, it's suitable to the time. It's kind of a goofy Christmas thing that I did a couple years ago. I tried to put the various Christmas tropes into, or Christmas motifs into kind of Lovecraftian monsters. And I ended up with
Oh.
this house in the middle of the woods that had, well, it had a man who had been brought back from his essential assaults, who was basically a giant fat man with a big white beard who was running around naked in the house. There was let's see, there was a rat thing who kind of played the part of an elf. There was and I remember Nyarlathotep, I think, was a deer, or was a black stag running around on the back lawn leaving reindeer prints.
Nice.
Yeah. Uh, the holidays are always kind of interesting simply because like so much happens. Like I have a lot of family, like there's a lot of births at this time, and I also have a lot of family deaths at this time too. So a lot of people have like the cold and the dark. Like I really appreciated the insurgent or the resurgence of like Krampus mythology and Krampus movies,
Mm.
where you have the one where it's like the horror anthology at the mall with the spirit of evil spirit. You've lost the spirit of Christmas, and now Krampus is going to run amok in zombie apocalypse style, or like that sort of wish demon, like that whole that winter
Mhm.
spirit has seeped into you, and now it's going to punish you. which is always sort of fun. And of course, growing up with things like Black Christmas or like all through the house were like the maniac in the costume, and then
Mhm.
preying on that fear of someone taking something that's supposed to be familiar and comforting and twisting it. It's like, do you really know who that mall Santa is? You know? So it's they're fun little things, little twists. I'm sure there's like somewhere out there was like some maniac story that kind of inspired that. It's kind of like looking at early vampire myths, like with the JB case, where the kids were playing in this field and they fell into an old
Mm.
grave and they found that the the body had been beheaded and the legs had been crossed over the chest and that sort of thing. And then they did my dad's one of the anthropologists at my dad's office of the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology actually did the serology on that, and they found out that the JB guy had died of tuberculosis, and because
Mm.
of burial practices, and that led into that. Yeah, this guy's a vampire. He's rising and he's killing his entire family. Because when it's cold, you don't put bodies in the ground,
Right.
and so you
Hmm.
have it in the parlor. So it's an airborne disease. So everybody gets sick, and then like they look better, and then they like wasting away, they're coughing up blood, and so now that leads into this entire family in this village dying unexplainably. And then by the time they figure out, they get the idea, yo, this is a vampire. Everyone's dead. And now it's the vampire has been slain. Hooray, sort of things. So like early 1900s vampire myths were very, very, very much part of the tapestry of the times because of burial practices. And I just find that absolutely fascinating.
I love taking legend and myth and then finding the history that surrounds it. I have a Monster of the Week one shot that I run that uses the Jersey Devil as your monster, but is also steeped very deeply in a lot of the actual history of the like wealthy families that developed the area around the Pine Barrens. Which is great because it gives me the option of you can have a genuine monster, or the monster can be mankind. You know,
Mhm.
pick your poison, and it almost every time I leave it up to the players. You know, if they fully buy in that the monster's doing this, then it's the monster, and if they are like, that person seems like a suspicious real estate developer, maybe this is a Scooby-Doo situation, then it's her instead, you know, and that's a very uh that's the kind of play that I like to do with like urban legends particularly, is like, how much of this do you believe, and your beliefs shape the
Mhm.
direction that it goes, you know.
This is kind of a thought bouncing off that a little bit. Actually, this is more kind of talking about the vampire horror aspect. It's interesting to me. I mean, you mentioned Alandra, you mentioned the idea that vampires presage recession.
Hmm.
I've never read that myself. I'm gonna have to look into that. One thing that I do know is that vampires have a way of being the explanation for disease. And so we
Yes.
see it with tuberculosis, we see it with syphilis. Anne Rice, Poppy Z. Bright kind of walked us through the HIV/AIDS crisis. I want to see what the COVID vampire looks like. I don't know if I've seen that figure yet, and I'm curious. I don't know if I'd be interested in the panel's thoughts on if we have the vampires that are tuberculosis and syphilis and HIV/AIDS and other kind of bloodborne diseases. What does the COVID vampire look like? How does the legend differ at that point?
Funnily enough, I know that there's COVID erotica out there.
Okay,
It's not all Chuck Tingle, I swear. It's not all Chuck Tingle writing it, but it's
I
like
believe you.
we,
Yeah.
There's
but
the horror.
yeah, it's like I don't know. I think like with all the stuff with COVID, it's that tech bro or gal, that influencer that's like on their phone, sort of like social vampire sort of thing where it just drains all of your energy and your attention and telling
Yeah,
you
the
a bunch
energy. Okay, the energy
you know,
vampire. Yeah.
I think that's more of what that sort of thing is, where it's like because everyone was locked inside. So if you're a vampire that drinks blood, you're pretty much screwed because it's like no one's out on those streets
But if you're a
unless you're
vampire
feeding
that
up.
can get to somebody through their computer screen,
Hmm.
Well, we do have the COVID ghost. Uh, if
Yeah.
if you haven't seen Host, which was just mwah, what a wonderful live using just Zoom to create a horror movie about a demon going between the different Zoom people.
yeah.
Oh yeah, with like unfriended and stuff like that too, or
Yeah.
blocked. Uh,
Well, and that's a
Yes.
very cult thing, the idea of
yeah.
utilizing, at least the most recent version of cult, utilizing the computer as
Mm.
a tool for horror
Hmm.
is a very kind of cult motif.
I have a running argument with a playwright friend of mine. Not argument, but like we have a running bit about how you can't do any of Shakespeare's plays in contemporary settings without adapting them because a cell phone completely fixes 90% of the tragedy plots because unless you manufacture a reason for Romeo to have no signal, he's able to text Juliet and tell her what's happening and she doesn't poison herself, right? Um, and it's so fascinating to me because on the flip side, that's talking very classical tragedy structure, but like I see so much horror now where the rise and specifically the rapid rise of technology. I think we're all of an age where we lived through this boom of the technology growing up alongside us to a greater degree than it has since probably World War I. Um, and there is something kind of inherently horrific about that in and of itself. And so the amount of horror that I can see now coming from technology is such a fascinating kind of spin on, the idea of incorporating legends, because it is all about that, like, the chain email is now how the demon makes its way through the wires and things
Hmm.
like that. It's really fascinating and terrifying in a metaphorical and literal way.
Oh
Well,
yeah,
that
I
is
love
the
meme monsters now because we don't share chain emails anymore. Now we just post stuff to chat.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, and that was the core of J horror, as cell phones and as technology started to grow. That's how the ghosts got in by you interacting with technology. You are inviting them into the real world. Like one missed call, with the ring with the tape.
Mhm.
If you didn't interact with that technology, you know, you wouldn't be interacting with them. You wouldn't be inviting them in. But once you touch it, it cannot. It's like butterfly wings. It's done.
Maybe that's the COVID vampire. It's that one guy who you invited into your pod without vetting him first to see if he's
Just
Yeah.
already in a pod.
Oh God. So like an earlier evolution of the internet vampire, the chain emails is the rise of phone lines, right? Because a lot of times the underground phone lines went through graveyards. So
Oh
that was like
yeah.
some of the earlier stories of that too. So, and it's just like talking, people that go out in the middle of the, sitting there in front of the graves overnight, or people eating the sins of the village. So like we see so it's like all these things kind of stem back from those earlier things. It's like making sure someone's not accidentally buried alive, or hey, make sure he stays in that grave tonight,
I
with the
think
horses. It
I
all
can't
cut up.
remember if it was Twilight Zone or it was an old black and white, but basically a woman started getting phone calls from her dead husband. It
Mm.
was because one of the phone lines had dropped onto the graveyard. So he's literally calling in.
Yeah, the questions of thinking back to like mythology, so much of mythology revolves around like thresholds. You always had like the god of the threshold that you had to kind of pay respects to and things like that. And you see that in many, many cultures. You also have like liminal spaces. And especially with the rise
Mhm.
of technology, we've seen a lot of interesting kind of media around the idea of both physical and digital liminal spaces, which is, that rich, ripe place where things from the other side might be able to permeate in. If we can get there, they can get there, and what happens when you meet in the middle. or when the lines blur, and it's such a rich place to explore.
I tried to do that with Blood Dipped Wings, which was a podcast, because I took cults, uh, the Highway God, and
Mm.
basically wherever any highway. I mean, we are fascinated with the highway in the United States. Just apparently, it's freedom and escape. Well, this particular one, once you started talking to it through your radio or through that jukebox at the roadside diner, it would ask you, okay, do this for me and I will make all your dreams come true.
Mm.
And it was like the monkey's paw deal that basically uh, the players had to pop somebody's tire, and then a session later they found out that that person, because that tire went flat, the entire family was murdered
Oh,
on the road. So you could
we
do a
love
lot.
a
Yeah, yeah, you could do a lot with just very standard folklore.
cool. We have a speaking of ghosts, we have a question from the shadows that's gonna chime in.
Hmm.
This dovetails with something that I was going to mention earlier, and it doesn't really directly mention a deal with monsters, but what I think something that's interesting that I think that we should keep in mind, especially as we look at technology, is that every kind of example of like memes and things like that that we're using now as kind of our basis for our digital horror, it has analogs in the past. It has previous um, um, it has previous versions of itself. There was a period of time, for example, where before we were all getting chain letters on our email, we were getting Xerox lore, we were getting fax machine lore. I think remembering that that sort of stuff was out there and that those previous kind of ideas are present. It's for me that it's fascinating to see how folklore repeats itself.
I'm gonna jump in really quick because apparently our spooky voice from the shadows was muted and just reiterate the question that was sort of presented was uh sometimes as you're reading modules and things like that, you come across a monster, a villain, an antagonist, whatever. It's like, oh, this is really interesting. Or when you're writing and you're creating it, you come up with this great idea, and then you discover that that actually had some basis in folklore or myth or older stories. And so there's a question about like, have we encountered that before? What sorts of things did I more or less sum that up correctly? Yeah, it's where did we encounter that incidentally or find connections that we didn't know we'd made. I can't think of a specific incident for myself. I do know that I have written many plays in my uh vast and mostly unproduced oeuvre that deal with death, and every time I hit another one of those, I'll be like, oh, I have this really crafty idea for how this, thing is going to manifest. So many of them are horror plays, some of them are comedic. Almost every time that I think I've come up with a really clever idea for like how the grief is going to manifest or something, I realize that that is because of some thing that I had previously researched for a past script. And the similar thing happens with all my TTRPGs. I have run so many one shots based on memes, like literally drawn from memes, that sometimes I circle around and I'm like, oh, I could do this great. And I'm like, no, I've done that one already. I have a whole series that is Halloween versus Christmas, based on that meme about Halloween is the only thing that keeps Christmas from creeping earlier and earlier into the year. Like I've done like that 4 times, and every time I'm like, have I already done the Nutcracker? Did I already do the Goblet goat? Have they ever met Krampus, or has he just always lurked in the shadows? Right? Um, this is my version of "There's nothing new under the sun," which is just that
Mhm.
I have spent so much time in these worlds that at a certain point I lose track of which things I have already done. Um, maybe I need to play some different games so I'm working with some different lore.
Yeah, I ended up writing this like sci-fi horror. Well, now we put a horror spin on it, but it was sci-fi race, and it was like, oh man, this is a really cool idea based off of like energy producing bacteria, because I read about that, like finding them in the mud. It's like, oh, what if we had a species that did that internally? How would that play out? And then how would you do it in a far future sci-fi setting where everything uses energy, weapons and shields and stuff like that? And so if you had something that eats that energy as your bad guy, that sort of thing. And then like how would they cultivate that sort of thing? And then I did all this stuff and all this work, and then I got introduced to Zensha and cultivation fiction, and it's like, fuck, I just made cultivators in a sci-fi setting, and I did all this work and it's already there. But it's like, hey, wouldn't this be kind of cool if people were able to do feedback loops and help each other become more powerful, and then like consuming energy, and it's like energy vampires, uh most incubi, and then it's like Zensha, and it's like, fuck. Oh well, it's a good idea. I'm going to go with it anyway, and I'm using it. So yes, people in the YouTube are saying we need wikis to keep track of our lore.
Yes.
I used to have one. It died on the old computers. Now I just have to read my old work.
Mm.
Um, well,
Yeah, I think the only thing I've
yeah.
been is I've been undermined by, because I'm fascinated with liminal spaces and negative space. So I think I'm creating an entire campaign based on liminal spaces behind hotels, and then somebody drops a frickin' YouTube line. I'm like, what the hell? There's an entire culture based on this. So
It's I think Kim's right. It's really just the damn it, this is a good idea, so I'm still gonna use it. And just finding that way to then still not even make it your own, but just own it for yourself, right?
yeah.
So
I
that it
just
works in the
shamelessly
story you're telling.
steal.
Also that's valid.
Yeah, no, I would I one of the best sets of scenarios I ran recently for my personal group for Call of Cthulhu was entirely based off Alison Rumfitt's "Tell Me I'm Worthless," and the various the kind of interesting ways that she utilizes ghosts in that book. The very kind of I'm sort of obsessed with the ways that she's come up with utilizing ghosts, and it's kind of gotten me on this track of wanting to do something that very much has its finger on the pulse of what is happening today, and I want horror that reflects the political climate of today. So I took her angle on trans culture or trans politics in the UK,
Mm.
and I moved that to, I mean, I'm from Southern California originally. So, despite the fact I've been living in Newfoundland for quite a few years, I grew up in a very kind of multicultural environment, um, surrounded by culture that came from down south, and also kind of the the immigration challenges that come with that as well. And I wanted to reflect some ideas there, present those to some players. And I freely stole from Alison Rumfit's ideas of ghosts that can come from the future and ghosts that can take the form of pop culture figures. And also having the person narrate to you what the ghost is going to do to them before it gets a hold of them. So then that way they've already had the trauma, despite the fact they roll, they roll a 0-1 and get out of the situation.
You never want to waste a good monologue with a gory description if you don't have to.
No, it was fantastic. I had I had a player character running through the streets of her suburban kind of tract housing subdivision, being chased by Dr. Phil. It was wonderful. And I had her narrate, what would happen if he
Oh
got his meaty
God.
paws around her neck.
Oh,
That made my skin crawl. Oh man.
Isn't it
well,
fantastic? That's again
That's fantastic. Yeah.
read Tell Me I'm Worthless. If you haven't read it, there's an opening scene involving a Morrissey poster that is just it changed the way I think about ghosts.
Excellent.
well,
That's great.
I think that is a great place for us to wrap up on that excellent, on that horrifying image and that excellent recommendation.
Well, the thing is, what you need to realize is there's a link between folklore and popular culture, so it all fits. It all comes together.
Is that not
The
what we've been
circle.
talking about for the last hour and a
We've
half?
all been talking about the same thing. Yes, exactly.
It's like we know what we're talking about.
Anyway, thank you all for being here. We've got just a few minutes left, so let's go back around in reverse order so you can remind everyone who you are, where to find you, and plug anything you want to plug. With Kim.
All right. Again, I'm Kim Godwin. You can find me on Twitch. Yeah, you can find me on Twitch. Twitch, studiohnh.com. You can find me at my website, kimberlygodwin.com or studiohnh.com. And then I'm Kim Godwin 18 on X and Instagram. Everything's connected from my website. Right now we're working on Curseborn City, or Curseborn, Seattle City of Curses. Heaven is Red's coming out, and I'll eventually finish writing my cult scenario Badlands. It'll be fun. It's a big book. It'll be fun.
Great. Stephen.
My name is Stephen Wall. My primary website is www.delapore.media. That's DELAPORE.media. You can find me as Delapore Media on Blue Sky. I have a product out right now called Somebody Think of the Children. That's for the Miskatonic Repository. And you can also check out my podcast, which I'm working on episode 5 right now. It's the Delapore Media podcast, and I look at various topics. I've covered vampires, ghosts, folk horror, and I'm looking at suburban horror this coming January.
Jason.
I'm Jason Fryer. Basically, right now I am currently working on Heart of Ravendale for the Legend in the Mist series. Also wrote several sections in The Illusion, published Beyond Darkness and Madness for Cult Divinity Lost. And you can find me, I am not socially, I'm socially awkward is what I am. You can find me on Blue Sky at Otter Poet, like the furry thing and the guy that writes.
Lovely. And I am Alandra Hileman, aka Lady Bedivere. You can find me at Lady Bedivere on pretty much anywhere the socials are mediated. I am a writer, social media manager, and TTRPG player. mostly over on Miskatonic Playhouse and Quests and Chaos these days. And I'll have a lot of projects coming in the new year that hopefully I'll be able to share with all of you. Thank you everyone for joining us, for chatting, and thank you to Ryan and Illusia Horror and Con for running our back end. Please enjoy the rest of the con. There's more live streams and panels coming up throughout the weekend, and we'll see you all next time.
See you soon.